Welcome in this new podcast episode. Today I'm talking to Franzisca Weder. Welcome. Willkommen.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I just asked you before because I was kind of confused. I wasn't sure. Are you now in Austria? Are you now in Australia? Because you are all over the place, right?
That is true. And I feel with I don't know, I'm kind of embracing the globe a bit with all the the journey that we're on for quite a while now. And so yes, I'm originally from Germany, and we moved to Austria quite a while, probably 20 years ago. And we lived in Vienna, and we lived in a smaller place in Klagenfurt, which is closer to Italy and Slovenia. And then from there, we spent a year, went to New Zealand for a year, where I had a teaching fellowship at the University of Waikato on the Northern Island in Hamilton. And then we've moved back to Klagenfurt, but we felt like, okay, we really want to show our kids the world and let them, I don't know, just have them to give them a feeling of this earth being a wonderful, pretty diverse place. And so I took on a position at the University of Queensland in Brisbane in Australia 4 years ago. And this is where we spent 4 years of our life before we then returned to Europe last year in July. So we are back in Vienna now, and I'm at the Vienna University of Business and Economics now, and following my passion, which is teaching and researching sustainability communication with all its dimensions, with all its dynamics.
Well, and you'd say now sustainability communication, but in the past, your works and your the publications were a lot about CSR, right? The corporate
Yes.
responsibility communications, and well, not responsibility communication, but where is there the difference for you?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. So I'm trained as a journalist. I studied journalism and kind of slowly moved to the other side of the desk, did a lot in strategic communication, public relations. And in the kind of beginning of the 2000s, the whole topic around how much organizations are responsible for what they're doing and how this responsibility is allocated but also taken through communication quite a lot. So that was something I found really fascinating, because then this intersection or this interplay between organizations of all kind, shape, size in our society and the public sphere or the society. This is something that fascinates me quite a bit. So I do love to explore how organizations are embedded in the society, with everything they communicate about. So therefore, CSR and the fact that they are communicatively embedded in the society, and therefore, as I said, take responsibility through their communication. That was something that kept me busy in my research, and so I tried to explore CSR communication and the dimensions around it. But then, of course, latest since 2015, sustainability sneaked in as a very interesting term, and as a sometimes language token that is used and abused, especially by corporates, quite a bit, as we know. So I think that was kind of very naturally that this was very interesting for me from a communication perspective, in terms of how do organizations and especially corporates use sustainability? How do they define it? How much is just taken on by those kind of increasingly established regulations and frameworks that exist, and where's the gap? So I'm always very critical and try to see, okay, But what happened there? Like, how did this sustainability story emerge? How much has it been driven by corporates? Quite a bit with everything they talk about. And how much is it now established as this story of growth, story of transformation, and so on? So, sorry, I don't want to kind of expand on this too much because it's really something I'm care about quite a bit in terms of how much has this story, a positive story of sustainable growth and innovation already established, but how much is it still a very corporate and a story that is very much happening within our existing capitalistic system? And where are those gaps? Like, why do we see those gaps? Why isn't sustainability really negotiated within organizations before they talk about it? And how can we create more awareness around how important it is to negotiate what it means? Latest, if we suddenly discover that, sustainability is very established in Germany, it's very established in the Netherlands, in Austria, in Europe, in the United States, but then if we kind of cross the border towards Central Eastern European countries, if we then go further to Asia, well, sustainability is still a very Western concept as well. So then we get those cracks and we feel like, okay, something happened there. And it's kind of, to tie it back to where I started, it's still, from my perspective, the communication about sustainability and the communication of sustainability are very, very interesting topics and very important that we think more about it. So this is what I'm doing.
So, you gave me a lot of hooks to dive into, but there's been one question now going on in my mind, which I shouldn't do as asking these questions because it redirects my attention. But I have this question now. So you've been born in Germany. You've been living a lot of your life in Austria. So they are both countries, as the Netherlands, I would say, used to be probably, under Rhineland culture, right? So where companies have, like because you mentioned like being embedded in a community and have responsibility to this community. So I would say that you have a culture, as Franzisca, but also we as Europeans, at least in these countries along the Rhine, of companies, of family businesses who have a particular idea of what role their company plays in the community, in the environment, with their employees, but also with other citizens. And on the other side, because you've been to Australia, and you've been also, really feeling the culture there, and you talk about corporate responsibility and corporate communication, you have the corporates from the Anglo-American point of view, where the most important point is to increase profits, to increase earnings. And if that is your most important driver, oftentimes it will do harm to others, right? And others can be nature or people or whatever. And so to give you an idea, so when I think about corporate communication, I think about greenwashing. I think about, negative. It makes me angry a lot of times. So that's, there's no question, but I think this is what I'm feeling. And I would love for you to give your thoughts about this.
I think there are, again, a lot of different aspects in that. I think it's easier if we kind of look at cultural differences or cultural perceptions more like on an individual level, maybe a bit later. I would say something about CSR and sustainability and this kind of corporate view, which then kind of stimulates all the criticism around greenwashing quite naturally first. So I think corporates, I would say now kind of across the world, because it's mainly those big corporates who've been communicating in that space for 2 decades now, even longer. If we look at the energy corporations who started in the 90s with their environmental reporting and then turned it or kind of developed into the CSR reporting in the early 2000s, and then into now sustainability and very recently ESG reporting. So we can see this kind of transition from voluntary environmental reporting to kind of more accountable communication, which we see now. And they're doing this communication of sustainability or of their responsibility on a very professional level now. And they are accounted for that because they have to meet all the guidelines. They have to kind of tick all the boxes now. And one way to look at it from my perspective is a positive way, which means they probably did not always disclose everything. They did not probably always follow our kind of normative understanding of communication, being objective, being transparent, being trustworthy, and so on. However, they did communicate about it so much that at least in the countries along the Rhine, or even in the United States, and kind of going beyond, it's there. The story is there. It's in our mind. Like, we know what this is about. We do see the climate crisis happening, and we do have this counter story of, hey, there are like good things happening. So it's established. So with the redundancy of saying, oh, that's great, and we will be CO2 emission free and net zero in 2030 and blah, blah. It's redundant, and for critical thinkers and for people dealing with it, it feels like, yeah, or we kind of reach the tipping point in terms of that can't be true. It's too aspirational. So, okay, no, greenwashing. But by the same time, with all the labeling, with all the communication, with the marketing around it and the green marketing now, it's there. So they managed to establish those social representations of sustainability in our heads, kind of thinking of us as consumers. However, and here comes, so to say, then the other way to look at it, from a more critical perspective. My feeling is that a very specific perspective on sustainability, a very specific sustainability of growth, as I mentioned before, has been established very purposely, which doesn't leave enough room to develop new narratives, to develop new kind of alternatives to our market-driven capitalistic system. And this is where it's definitely where there's the gap that I mentioned before, where there is a problem, especially in the countries where it's so established, which are traditionally green and where we're so open for that, and kind of those new social representations, they connect nicely with what we learned from our grandparents and growing up in a village and so forth, our traditions. And this gap of redefining sustainability, telling new stories, telling those alternative stories to growth, to more and faster and quicker. So there's not much space to develop that, because all the public communication and even our individual communication is so overlapped, and it's so kind of dominated by everything that has been communicated. And here, the kind of and here my feeling is that looking at sustainability from an intercultural perspective, or kind of delving into the meaning of sustainability in other kind of different ethnic backgrounds and other cultures and in other areas of our world, has the potential to create a new understanding of what sustainability actually means. What I mean, I'll give you an example, is if you kind of talk, I had an amazing student from Russia in my lecture. It was a class on CSR and sustainability communication, and probably in the second or third session, she said, like, you know what, sustainability doesn't work in Russia. It's not that we blame it as being a Western or a US dominated thing, but resource scarcity is not a thing in Russia because the resources are there. So this notion of sustainability as like, ooh, our resources and someone will take it away, or we don't have it anymore and we have to rethink that. So this kind of framing of sustainability, this notion of sustainability, is can't be translated to, let's say, this background. And then if I talk to students in Asia, which I did in Australia a bit, because there were a lot of students from Asia, from different countries in Asia in my classes, and we talked about it. It's really interesting because sustainability is so abstract, so far away, and like on this UN SDG level, and very much linked to, oh yeah, the big corporates that have whatever. But if you start talking to them, it's the notion of caring for things that is much stronger than being economic or rational with your resources, and kind of, and there are differences which are definitely worth to be explored, and they are definitely worth to be, they could help us to develop those kind of new approaches to deconstruct the existing kind of master frames and those master narratives, and to develop a new understanding and maybe a more granular understanding of what are we talking about. So that was a big answer.
No, I love it, and what always happens when somebody gives a big answer is, so multiple times during the answer I have ideas what I can ask a question about, and then at the end I have another question, of course. But what do you want your students to do in the real world? What is it that you want to accomplish as a teacher with your students?
My biggest passion is to make them curious, but also to make them courageous, and to develop this kind of authorship for change. So I know that it's kind of increasingly, the term, "I'll be an agent of change," is increasingly brought up. It's reflected, and kind of from a teaching perspective, like what do we want us to be as teachers, and how transformative can we actually be? What is our impact on the students? But for me, it's really the courage and the willingness to be a maker, to be someone who then feels the agency, so feels the capability to change things, and very simple, to talk about it, to spark conversations. That will be the key, to spark conversations and to make people kind of talk about it, because we have so much in our head, and there's war coming in from our phones and like everything we get. But to be forced to talk about it, and to be stimulated to talk about it, and to actually spark conversations about sustainability, that is, and then to take authorship for your own story. So to feel the agency, and not everyone will be a pioneer, not everyone will be a rebel, and not everyone will be a revolutionary, but we can all make other people talk about it.
Yeah, you coined the term PR-able. Yeah, that was nice. I'm also thinking about, and I try to mention her name as often as I can, and what she's talking about is Catherine Hayhoe, climate researcher from Canada, and she also goes around the globe and gives talks. And she was recently in Germany, and also I think in Austria. And she has a great TED talk, and I will put the link in the show notes. And the main thing that she says, and I think that's why I'm mentioning, is it connects what you're just saying. Is the main thing that we can do right now about climate change is talk about it, right? Is having these conversations. And that's exactly what you just mentioned, is what you're trying to do with your students, is that they can talk about it, they initiate conversations about it. And I think that is really important, because so many people, if you like you are and I am involved like in the IDGs, and we know about the SDGs, and we know about the ideas of sustainability, but there's so many people out there have no clue, have no idea, and they just have I wouldn't say false information, but they have information which is not complete. Let's put it that way. And they know, and they talk about, things that they are not responsible about, and they don't feel responsibility to make changes or to do something. Because I was just having this meeting yesterday, a workshop. This one person was saying, well, the plane is flying anyway, so I can just take that seat that's still available when I go on a holiday and take a plane. And another person was saying in the group was saying, well, if I don't go and I say something to other people why I'm not going and not using the plane, I have two people who are not on the plane. So that's a different view on the same story. And that's, I think, why it's important to have like these conversations with people together in a group, so people see that there is more ways of thinking about this issue than just theirs, and saying, yeah, there's just a seat and I will just take it because otherwise other people will take it if I'm not doing it. So I love that idea, what you said, is so that they are able to spark a conversation, to spark a different way of looking at. So that's, I really like that part.
And maybe one little comment to that, like people who deal with sustainability quite a bit in education for sustainability or for sustainable development and transformation, they always think about the complexity and the need that people are able to deal with the complexity, so that they don't pull out and say like, oh, whatever, and allocate the responsibility on an organizational level or political or governmental level. But to deal with the complexity, the way is not, from my perspective, the way is not to get more information, because then exactly what you said, the risk is there to get the false information or not to get all the information that is necessary. But the least thing you can do is talk about it and try to then, in those interactions, deconstruct the complexity and make yourself able to deal with it. And the second thing that I feel is very important, is that we still nevertheless need those pioneers, those people who kind of expand our understanding of the normal to a certain extent, so that, as you said, this room is created where people feel more comfortable in doing slightly different things, but of course not as extreme as they are, or someone else who's not taking the seat on the plane. But then it allows someone else to say, like, oh, if this person is not doing it, well, I can potentially pull out any as well. So this is something I strongly believe in, that we need those extremes and we need those first people doing something, saying something. So the sparking those conversations is more than having the conversations. And so we need the stimulation. And this is at least teaching PR, just teaching strategic communication, teaching communication theories as well, is it's very close to teaching techniques and ways to spark, to stimulate, to initiate, and by the same time to curate those conversations.
I saw the two videos that were posted on your YouTube channel, where one, or maybe it was not on your channel, but I saw where you were in. So one, and they were both when you were in Austria. So it was like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. One was about the menstruation products for female, and you stacked them all up and showing how much waste has been produced that we are not, most of us not aware of, even not the women. And the other one was, he had these walls or
kind of wall bricks, or wall bricks, or construct like boxes.
Yes, and you had them in a mall, if I was correct. And then you saw the plastic usage of 2 weeks of the university and the students in the university. And because you made it so visible, and what I liked about the part was that how you did ask people to, you didn't just ask them questions, but you asked them how to contribute. So you asked them to stack, for example, and put something on the tower, or you asked them to put these plastic bottles into those walls. And I think that was a great way of getting people involved on a level that people can do easily without feeling like, oh, I'm attacked now and I have to defend my position or anything, right? So I think that was really interesting how you did that. I like that part.
Yeah, it was like, for me, it was exactly about sparking those conversations. And you spark a conversation um, very easily if you make people part of an experience. So, and there's a lot of kind of very basic marketing and strategic communication stuff that is linked to psychology, in terms of if you tell someone something, they will probably not remember. But if you make it emotional, then it's more likely to make them remember this. But then if you really kind of make it an experience and people participate in this experience, then of course um, it's more impactful and it has much more resonance on the one hand, but on the other hand, it also creates conversations that then potentially go further, uh, especially in the interaction, in the situation, and then they would have gone if you just kind of asked them a couple of questions on a more cognitive level. So it was a whole day activity, and people approaching, like we collected all the waste, we spread it out at the front door of the university, and everyone who entered the university through the front entrance, which pretty much everyone was asked to pick up one bit of waste and then walk in and throw it in one of those wall bricks and or these boxes then. And it was not about kind of end product, this piece of art that remained there for another 3 months, so that kind of made the waste visible again, and was again a visual barrier of entering the university, in terms of like waste is not gone just because you throw it in the right bin. But by the same time, this process of kind of picking up the waste again and throwing it back again, so that was really interesting, and it caused some very very interesting reactions. Like there were people who got really angry and they threw the waste against the outside wall of the university and stuff like that. So it was really interesting. People became really emotional, and some other students were like, "Yeah, I'm not touching this again." And so it was amazing. And then especially the conversations that we picked up right there, and then we did a video, shared it via Facebook, get a lot of reactions there. The local media talked about it, and they had some articles in the media. And then there were people like, "Oh, and how can you do this?" And the university has nothing else to do than kind of collecting waste. What a rubbish! And it was interesting to
Well, you say interesting, but I can also imagine it's like frustrating, and it requires a lot of courage to continue in these kind of things because you get all this negative feedback. And I was thinking about the,
I would say
I'm,
no.
yeah,
No.
hold on.
Yeah, you
Because I
come.
was thinking about these outliers that you mentioned, right? So I'm
Mhm.
thinking, for example, about Catherine Deal in Germany with the autocorrector. And also here in the Netherlands, for example, Babette Porcelain or other females who like they talk about zero waste, for example, or about all the waste that we as consumers
Mhm.
produce. That's the biggest part of the waste that we produce because we are consuming,
Mhm.
and they get attacked so much publicly on the social media that I my heart breaks sometimes to see this, and at the same time, I feel so empowered by them by keeping up with it and also continue the work that they do despite all the negative, because also, of course, they get a lot of positive feedback. So I was thinking about that when you just mentioned that, and I'll let you respond now. Sorry.
No, that's all good. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. It was more that I loved that it got very conflictual.
Hmm.
I love that we caused a lot of polarization and a lot of kind of because like sustainability is such a consensual and very kind of peaceful harmony creating term. So you will not find anyone who says like, "Oh, sustainability, I'm not doing anything, like I'm not sustainable." Like no one would say that, because there's always a minimum to kind of consensus or to agree on. So but to actually have people raging and people bringing up this critical perspectives, that creates a discourse, that creates an argumentation, and this is necessary, because otherwise, like, we're all kind of very self-confirmative and like, oh my God, this is amazing, and look at this bag, and I did it like at my old pair of jeans, and all the social media kind of avocado sandwich, like, oh my God, look at this, and I'm now vegan. So this kind of very kind of positive story goes too far away and creates this dichotomy to the kind of bad stories, climate crisis, the bears are dying, and the oceans are just about to, the tipping point is here, and like there's so much crisis, and then this beautiful kind of sustainability, like refurbishing story, and that is told on social media quite a bit. That it's going to like into it's too it loses the connection gets lost. And if we create spaces, communication spaces or conversational spaces where those two stories are brought together again, and if those, if we create a space where there's more antagonism, where it's more kind of brought, if we create those touching points between the stories, I think that's amazing, because there's a lot of energy in that.
But how did the students feel about that? The controversy specifically?
So especially the first eco-culture jam that I did with the menstruation products, the tampons and the pads. So that was like the students developed the topics themselves. So that was not my kind of idea. And it was a group of female students only. So that worked quite well, and they developed this idea. But then still a few were very, very skeptical at the beginning, and they were like, I'm not cool. And then I'm standing there like on this public square, and I'm stapling those tampons and pads, and what if a friend drops by, and what if they see me? But then they develop this strength and this kind of activist potential, and they're like, oh no, you're not, we're doing that. And by involving people passing by, they could see, yeah, it works, because then there were kind of girls passing by like, oh my God, and my boyfriend sees me in the back, and freaking out and running away. And then other people came and very actively participated, and so they get a lot of courage and support and empowerment out of this. So that was good.
Yeah, nice. If you look at what we talked about before with the Rhineland culture, right? So I think one of the characteristics of these companies are they live a lot in hidden, right? Like the books Hidden Champions. So they're not beating the drum about the work that they do. They just do the work because that's what they do. And so they have an owner who's usually in the background, and they don't have like a lot of PR work done. And some of those companies are really doing great work, right? They are really doing great work in the community, but also with the products that they build. How do you help them, or how could you help these companies to tell their stories more and share, because so that other companies and organizations can see these great examples as a usage for how they could change?
My feeling is that there are two answers in that. So one is definitely what you mentioned at the end, that storytelling and giving examples is definitely something that plays a key role in that. The big question is where are those stories told? And I can't really give you a really good answer for that at the moment, because I can see like the traditional media landscape erodes more and more, and it's really hard to find those spaces or those parts of the public sphere where those stories can be told. I think there's a lot of potential in social media to tell the stories. I think there is a lot of potential in kind of think tanks, in all those forums, in those networks, in kind of through podcasts and kind of conversational spaces where the stories are told. I'm not quite sure if it's even necessary, and that brings me to the other part of the answer. I'm not quite sure if it's necessary to make it a public story, or it's not the only way, because my feeling is that a kind of renaissance of going back to your organization and see who are the hidden champions within the organizations, and then how can they be those communication pioneers and tell the stories maybe in other networks, to kind of bring this whole storytelling approach and increased consciousness of like, what are our issues, what is important for us on this more granular or more individual level, and create those individual storytellers within the organization and maybe in the organizational networks makes more sense from my perspective in this fragmented media environment, compared to having the whole organization as one voice or one actor that desperately tries to create an image or the reputation instead of the whole organization story. Because this is what we already see. Again, positive examples, negative examples. We kind of go back and say, okay, like, how can we identify those people, those pioneers, those communicators, key communicators within an organizational context, and maybe send them out more, bring them more to the forefront, makes more sense. And this is one example that I often discuss with the students. And so if we bring in some guest lecturers from corporates and they tell us their stories and so on, and they say, and what you can always see also on the website communications, that they try to tick all the sustainable development goals, they try to talk about all those kinds of issues and try to be really good in all the spaces. But what if an organization says, well, of course, everyone talks about recycling and water usage and but what if we look around and try first to identify the issues that are very, very relevant for my employees, for my people here. And if we see, well, actually, they're like 20% of my people in my organization or corporate, my business, they deal with kind of work-life balance issues in terms of care issues, kids, elderlies, whatever, family members, then apparently this is an issue we should focus on. And yes, to do proper recycling, yes, to have a good kind of water recycling system in place, but maybe the stories that we need to tell are the stories that are really the kind of issues that are prevalent and important for my people. And this is what we stand for, because we do have a lot of expertise in the room with having those people on board. So they are the experts, not me as a sustainability consultant who thinks like, oh yeah, well-being issues are super trendy, like tick, 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 social issues, great. But apparently this is then much more inherent and much more comes from the core of the organization. And I do have, as I said, I do have the experts, I do have the communication knots, and it's very simple, and I think it's not rocket science, because as we all know from, like, if it's a university or a big corporation, where do you go to know what is actually happening? You go to the coffee kitchen, you ask, I don't know, someone who sits at the front desk who gets all the stories, who gets all the rumors. So the communication experts are those communication hubs, and therefore also the communication hubs for social, environmental, and value-related issues. The experts are probably not the CEO. It's probably not the press officer, and it's probably not the marketing guy. So it's most in most cases someone else. And to identify those people, to give them the competences and the skills to be an active communicator, from my perspective, that makes much more sense. Again, related back to a very, very fragmented media environment where you can't really control the flows of information and communication anymore.
I liked I like this because I think this actually reflects the whole idea of Rhineland thinking, right? Because in the Rhineland model, there is no superhero, right? So it is like I think it is a strange story that you um, see the CEO of a large organization as a superhero who made it all work, and well, what about all the people that work for you, right? What did they do? Why do we need to all answer all the questions with you? And I like the idea that you're just painting there, the picture about getting the real experts inside the company to have these conversations and on different platforms and different various media outlets, because not just because it's fragmented, because also they are on different places, because one expert who's on well-being is on a different platform than the expert who's on economics or who's on environmental issues, right? So yeah, wonderful view on this. Thank you. And also, one other thing I was still wondering about is the communication education, the PR education, still a very female driven expertise field?
Yes, it is, but not as much as probably the new emerging jobs are in the field of sustainability and CSR and ESG, reporting or consulting. It's really interesting. I had a chat with a colleague who's teaching at the University of Applied Sciences, and they have a program which is called Sustainability Communication and Green Marketing, and they are female only. And it is interesting. I'm currently doing this kind of analysis of job announcement in this area to learn more about the required skills and the role of communication in those jobs, and to kind of develop a bit of a typology in this kind of, there's so much out there now. But my feeling is, if I look around and in my networks in terms of sustainability experts, it is a very female branch. And I tell you one little story from my classroom. For about probably, let it be even 10 years now. In all my PR classes, I asked them to draw, like actually sketch, a typical journalist, a typical marketing person, and a typical PR person. And it's completely fascinating how the stereotypes remain over years and across cultures. So I did it in Australia, I did it in New Zealand, I did it in Austria. And you let them draw it, and you still get the male journalist wearing a pretty interesting trench coat, kind of having a pen and a notebook. And you get a female PR professional wearing a nice little black dress, and you get the marketing person who's still wearing the black framed glasses and still kind of either shaved like bold or I don't know, nice bit of gel in the hands, gadgets, I don't know, phones, stuff. Really interesting. And it's I didn't do it in terms of the sustainability jobs because I'm still not really able to point to, okay, this is a sustainability officer. This, so the job profiles are not as clear enough at the moment, but it's communication is still somehow female, and I could kind of rock up for another hour why this is still the case. There's a lot of good things that come along with it, but it's still there. So the answer is yes.
Yeah. Well, I think the why is an interesting question, but I think that we could fill another podcast about that topic. And I don't think it's necessary now to go into the detail, because I do have other issues or questions that I want to ask you. We are both connected to the inner development goals. How do you use the IDGs in your classes? How do you use it with your students? Because you just mentioned before how the other roles in these companies are, like you mentioned, that the well-being, and I immediately made the connection to, okay, this is more like an internal, this is more like inner stuff instead of just having the external focus and externalities, right?
Yeah, it's actually quite tricky to use it, and I would say I'm just at the beginning to explore new pathways and new avenues to actually develop a good way to do it. And I'm very happy because a new colleague is joining me, and she does a lot of research in terms of um, yeah, internal appreciation and how this is expressed across levels and through communication. So that is, I'm really looking forward to that one. Um, Internal communication is at the moment taught with either very strong focus on organizational culture or on conflicts and how those conflicts can be solved and how much this is related or how conflicts emerge in emails or kind of very bad leadership. So it's still a very leadership kind of CEO related discussion, especially at a university that deals a lot with management and leadership approaches. So that came very naturally. So I took on this new this course on internal business communication and internal organization communication. And my experience is that it's really the first challenge because before we can actually talk about those process of value creation and the process like the IDGs as a normative framework that we can work with, the first challenge is that it's really hard to identify the people we're talking about and the kind of responsibilities. And I'm very curious to hear your opinion on that because you're much more an expert in this area than I am, and by far, because my like for the students, I need to create an idea of organizations and I need to create an idea of who are the people working in this organization, like who are those individuals we're connected in a corporate, in a museum, in a university, in a specific department. How is this structured? Like, what do we talk about here? And how are they connected to each other? And this, I make them, so I asked them to do an interview with an internal communication person. And that was the biggest challenge for them to find the right person. So they most of the time ended up with HR because they felt like, oh, they are responsible for all those soft issues. Sometimes they stumble over someone who was somehow responsible for communication. So my biggest challenge at the moment is to really find what I don't want to happen is to stuck on this CEO management leadership level. And again, this is probably more a question that I would ask back or throw back to you and say, like, if you look at organizations who are on the way to work with the IDGs, apply it, kind of who try to find their own way to set those goals up for them and to work towards towards the goals. Who are the people who do it? Who are the ones who bring it in? Who are the ones who started it? Because that is something that interests me a lot. And my feeling is I can only talk about it in my classes and with the students and give them an idea about how to implement, how to curate it, how to orchestrate it, if we have a better idea about who is it, who sparks the conversation.
I don't have a clear answer yet, I would say, because it is all still very new, so it's a very young field. I am part of the practitioners network, so we have a monthly meeting with practitioners from all over the world, but mostly the part of the world that is awake at 8 a.m. And so you see a lot of like trainers and coaches who bring the topic to organizations and to bring it in as a tool to look at the development of their, employees, to think about these topics. And because in the end, it will have a positive effect on the output of the company or the results of the company. What I also can say is, since I organize the IDG hubs in my area, and we do invite monthly speakers on these topics. So I try to get various fields also as speakers, and we had twice now somebody from a company. One was the CEO, and the other one was, well, not the CEO, I would say the owner. It's not, so it's a company of 25 people, and the other is working as a manager in a larger company. I think they have like, was it 150 people or something like that. And why did we invite them? Because they had these great stories of how they work with their companies, very Rhinelandic. One, for example, is they pick up trash from companies. They have large trucks, and his idea was that the truck drivers can be more aware of the way that they drive and become more sustainable in the way of their driving. And so he took a course, and then he explained to the people how this works. And he took first on the people who were interested, and then slowly he took on all the other drivers. So it was like 80 people in the end. And what it resulted in was that they saved 30. So the interesting combination with this person is one, he's really interested in people and doing it in a soft way and having conversations instead of like pushing them and bringing them along. And he's also interested in numbers. So what he does, he's also calculating stuff to show that it's really working. So for example, they are saving 30% of diesel with 80 trucks. That is 120,000 liters of diesel every year. So that's a very clear result that you can save, and it doesn't hurt the environment anymore, but it's also saving as a cost perspective for the company, which is interesting for the financial person in the company. And what happened was that people are less sick. So the number of people that were sick decreased. So that's also a cost saving, but also it's also a mental thing, right? They had less accidents. So the cost of the insurance went down. So all these side effects happened. And what the interesting thing was, because what they said, one of the things that he said, I don't really care of what time you get to the client to pick up the trash. What I do care about is how safe you drive and how you feel, how relaxed you are while driving. So the drivers became a lot more relaxed. So they are not as stressed when they get home. They're just feeling, I had a great day. So it is a mental impact. But never in this process, they called it IDGs, of course. Never, because this is just something he felt is important for the company to do. It already started before the IDGs were there. And the same thing is with this owner of the company, also in my area. She has an idea of how she can involve more people from the community in the company and hire them from all kinds of backgrounds and educational backgrounds, but also cultural backgrounds. And she brings them in and she teaches them so they make products from steel. So she teaches them the process. She helps them to study the language, but she also helps the Dutch workers to understand the cultural differences and what happens when you talk to a person and they have a different view on the same conversation, right? So also, again, so she has a great company with a great work environment. She has no problem attracting new employees, which has been, a difficulty in the last 3 years or so, because people want to work there. They love working there. And she never calls it IDGs, right? But I've took them on as examples of how IDGs can help you as a company to build a great environment for your employees, and also make it economically valuable for your company too. So that's how I can answer this question. So I don't. So like you see here, there's two different people, right? So one is the owner who's really involved, and the other one is just somebody in a management position who's really involved. And how we started was also funny. They have like a group of 4 people who were interested in environmental issues. So what they did, they bought. So this is a huge site, right? So they have a huge company with all these trucks driving around and having all these places where they dump the trash, and they how you call it, separate that and reuse it and so on. So it's a huge site, and they bought 3 bikes. And the owner said, and it's his third generation, the owner said, what a stupid idea. We've never used bike. It's never been necessary because you can see we all drive around and we all find our way. So why did you buy bikes? And he didn't ask for permission, right? So he didn't ask for permission up front. He just said afterwards, maybe if it's necessary, I will say sorry, but that's it. And he had like 3 companions. That was also important. So now the bikes are never in the place where they start. They always are taken by employees. They are always driving around. So it works. So what he's doing with really small actions is showing how it can work and how you can make this work, and then tell the people, see, I've made these calculations, see what the results are. So different positions, but intrinsically interested and motivated on the topic. That's what I see. Does it help?
Absolutely. And what I really like is, don't call it IDGs.
Yes. Yes.
Because I think that's so true for the SDGs and for sustainability as well. Due to all the kind of overuse of the term. Don't call it that. That's definitely key for changing patterns of action, patterns of behavior, and patterns of thinking, to not call it that, because we're too far in the niche of, yeah. Green stuff, boring. So that is good.
Interesting that you bring me on this idea. I mentioned it, but you bring me on the idea. That's interesting. Yeah, that's a good point. What do you think, if you wouldn't call it IDGs, if you wouldn't call it SDGs, what do you think how would you teach your students to make the next step on sustainability communication, sustainable?
At the moment, I think that the most suitable term to teach them about the quality of what sustainable behavior is this notion of care. Sadly, it doesn't really work in German, but I'm teaching most of my class in English anyway, so that's not a problem. But it's because in English it works so nicely, not to ask them, like, what do you care about? Like, what's important? And in the moment you realize, well, that's actually really important, then you realize, oh yeah, that's why I care about it. And that's why I care for it. So I care that it stays, and that I don't lose it, and that I don't dump it, and that I don't, throw it away. And if you care about people, and you care about certain things, and it's not about the reasons why you care about it, and it's not if it's and the main point is not if it's important for everyone, but to realize things that you really care about, and then realize, oh, it's only a small step to then care for it. That is easy to understand, and that works again across cultures, which is nice.
If I'm not sure but if you have, how do you think, for example, Africa, how this works in communication there? Because we see that in the Western world, we are responsible for like so much waste and usage of energy and everything that's, making it so heavy for the earth to maintain us. And they are the barriers of carriers or the sufferers of what we've done and still do. How do they look at communication on this part?
I don't have experiences to draw on here, and I don't feel able to say anything about it until I wasn't there. So I can only kind of apply it to now being able to learn much more from students from India, from Pakistan, and then of course from Indonesia and Asia, kind of from a broader thing. And by the same time, kind of being an Australian, a country which is still where nature is right in your face, which is much more direct in everything you experience, taught me a lot about it. but I can't really say anything about Africa or South America or kind of Latin American countries.
Okay.
I really need to go.
Yeah.
Really need to.
Well, I think that's also an interesting point that I think about a lot and also talk about it with people is that it's, you see people that really make a huge shift in what they do and the way that they think about things is when they've really been to a place and been confronted with the results of what we do, right? So, for example, like I mentioned, the person who talked about zero waste in the Netherlands, she'd been to, I think it was Costa Rica, I'm not sure, but it was South America and a coast, and it was just plastic everywhere, and she was already being environmental aware, but she says, well, now I see it's a much bigger issue than I ever thought about.
Yeah.
And I should, really pay attention to this topic and really work on it more than just my own, my personal things that I do. And that is interesting. You see that a lot more, right?
Mm.
And I would say, how could we make people feel the same thing without traveling actually to the location? Because that just means that we have to travel all the world before we become really aware. That would be just stupid, because then we just need planes to go everywhere, right? That's not something we want. I feel.
The good or bad news is that we don't really need to go so far. I have wonderful colleagues in Skopje in Macedonia, and they created a program on environmental communication, working with local journalists and local communication campaigners, and go there. Like we're a family of 6, and we travel down to Albania with our van by the time we still had one, and you drive around, and you don't really need to go to Costa Rica to see kind of different standards in terms of recycling, and it's so that's one aspect on that. The other thing is that my feeling is that we need to be very, very careful in applying our theories, our approaches, our frameworks, which are very elaborated, to areas or to people where it's actually very different. And this is a very interesting new discovery, or probably not so new, but it's getting more a very visible discussion in academia, in my fields of environmental studies, environmental communication, sustainability communication. That's not about kind of applying certain approaches to Brazil and to how people communicate there and how journalists work there, but instead kind of learn from the philosophers who are who develop their thinking and their approaches being from Brazil. And the same as with kind of beautiful pedagogical approaches, Paulo Freire's work, and kind of there's so much in there. Instead of then saying like, oh, it's about knowledge dissemination, it's about stakeholder dialogues and she, it's very, very different, and there's so much to learn. And even in Australia, kind of one of the last examples where I stumbled over is that the Indigenous culture in Australia has when they meet, if they have official meetings, if they have even in institutions, they have something that they call yarning. And yarning means that they have a very random conversation until they feel like, yep, now we can start talking about the topic where we met or the issues where we met. And this yarning, this kind of sharing of like, oh, how are you? What happened? And oh, and I heard this about this person. And this very casual kind of conversation with no end, like, no, okay, let's have a 5-minute chat and then we start, okay, let's go off. But then kind of have this in a kind of just floating then into, okay, we might kind of, in the official discussion, that's or the topic or the reason why they met. It's something I find very intriguing, very interesting.
Yes, and I think we can learn so much also from those indigenous cultures, and also any culture anywhere, right? So I was just talking to a friend who's been to Costa Rica for 6 weeks, and she talks about how how relaxed these people are, how different they stand in life, and you know, relaxed driving, relaxed viewing at positions or at thinking. So I think there's a lot that we could learn from that too, right? Instead of just bringing um, our communication ideas and theories over there. Well, and Costa Rica, of course, is a good example because it's a nation who's really involved with the SDGs and the IDGs, which is interesting. I want to close this up, but I have one more thing that I found interesting because you've been writing quite a lot of papers, and you did some research on the communication during the pandemic, during COVID. Um, and what I'm interested about is because I was just listening to a podcast conversation with Nathalie Nahai, and I forgot the person she was talking to, but I will put the link in the show notes. And they were talking about communication, about COVID, and what she was saying was that we never came to so during the pandemic, it was very clear the government told us what to do when, and now we need to lock down. Now you have to stay home and then until 6, and you cannot walk outside, or you just can walk by 2 people. And so as long as the COVID, communication was around, they had very clear instructions for the public what to do and what not to do. Then at some point they said, okay, COVID is, it's just a regular virus. It's just a regular disease, so we don't do anything. And so all of a sudden the whole communication kind of dropped, right? So there was no reflection, no connecting to the topic, right? So, and as we know, a lot of people have lost friends, relatives, are still sick. So how do you see that? And maybe, I'm not sure if you can also make the connection with environmental communication, is right, or sustainability, about that topic too.
One thought would be that what happened is very normal to how public communication processes work. And it's called public issue life cycle. So it's like you have certain key events, and if they get more attention, then if there are more and more of those key events, then suddenly something jumps over this famous public attention line, and then it goes in a bit of a curve, or it gets more intense, and more individuals and more organizations and institutions and political institutions on higher levels get involved in the discussion, and this is what we call problematization. So it gets into a problem and everyone positions themselves, and then there is always a so-called tipping point when the issue gets, as I frame it, functional, when people start to use it for their communication. And people are like, we can make something out of this. Why don't we make use of the argumentation here or the story there? And the most important or the most influential factor is, as soon as you have regulations, if it's institutionalized, if you have those policies kicking in, and then it gets boring. So you kind of you leave the tipping point, and then the issue gets more latent. So it's still there. And if something happens again, it might pop up again. And people can still refer to it, but it's not as prevalent, it's not as important anymore. So those public issue life cycle models explain a lot of these dynamics. I think it's to apply this to environmental communication or climate crisis communication is very dangerous and maybe quite tricky, because climate crisis communication or environmental issues are so much broader, because it's not one issue. And this is a big mistake that is made here. Because it's not like, if we bundle it up and label it as climate crisis as an issue, that's not true. that doesn't really, it's so complex. It has so many variations, so it's so diverse, that I think we did more harm in labeling it that. Again, from kind of media public communication perspective here. So I think COVID-19 or pandemic related communication can't really be applied. Last comment, what we did learn is that communicators in this crisis, journalists, campaigners, those professional communicators, they learned a lot in terms of how to deal with information, how to deal with science communication, how to deal with polarization effects and stuff. So I think professional communication had a good and very healthy boost in terms of, yes, we can take agency, we can actually be a bit more active. We do not have to just report, like we need to open up those conversational spaces. We need to curate those discourses. And so I think there was a boost, and this is something we can also apply to all those environmental issues or climate related issues, that we need more professional communicators within organization context and beyond in the media or the public sphere.
Catherine, it was wonderful to talk to you. I really enjoyed it. I think the most interesting points I learned was the last one, of course, the idea that how you connected the COVID communication, but also bundling up it in climate when there are so many more topics, but also the making it visible, but by getting people involved by picking up the trash or by stacking the boxes to spark the conversation, to really get them into it. And I think the most important one I learned was don't call it IDGs. Don't call it the SDGs. That was a strong point that I will use and think about more in the next days. Yes, for sure. Thank you very much, Franzisca.
Thank you for having me. I learned a lot as well. So that was a great conversation. Thank you.